I'm Sam Donaldson. I'm a professor at Georgia State University College of Law and one of the co-authors of Federal Income Taxation, A Contemporary Approach.
Hi, I'm Donald Tobin. I'm a professor at The Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, and the case book we're talking about is the interactive case book on federal income tax.
I wanted to write a casebook that incorporated all of the best features of the books that I had been using when I taught the course before. Early in my years before I had tenure, I was always switching the casebook that I used from one year to the next because each time it seemed a different book always had some new feature or new content that I wanted to try out. After using 6 or 7 different books, I had a pretty good idea of what kind of techniques worked and what techniques didn't work, so I wanted to write the book that incorporated what I thought were all of the good techniques into a single volume. There are a lot of great tax titles out there on the market, but I think there's a few features that make our book pretty distinct. For one, we have a great combination of self-assessment questions and problems for class discussion. The self-assessment questions, students can gauge their own comprehension of the material, and the problems for class discussion allow professors to really force students to dig deep into the code and regulation provisions to really develop their understanding of how to read these complex areas of the law. We have the whole interactive portion of the book that introduces students to the real world of taxation, and unlike so many other volumes where there's that disconnect between the book and the practice and the actual experience of the law, ours serves as a gateway so that people can see how the tax law works in everyday real life through videos and other sound clips, photos, and the like.
The original book was a book written by Professor Donaldson at the University of Washington, and that's a book that I used in my class. And Professor Donaldson and I both felt that creating an interactive casebook would allow us to bring more enrichment and interest into the book. And so that's what we did in this new interactive casebook series. So the book does several things which we think are really, really important in helping students both learn about tax but also bringing in this additional materials. So for example, we have self-assessment questions in the book, and those questions are designed for students to be able to figure out whether they are understanding the material. So they can actually write answers to questions and see the answers, which are linked in the back of the book. In addition, we have links to tax returns so that a student, when they're talking about a particular subject, can see how that subject relates in the real world. And so that's a really neat and interesting feature that the book has. And then finally, tax is an area where there's constant public policy issues. And so the book has an ability to reach out on the World Wide Web to other things that are going on and to bring in those public policy issues into the classroom. So those are some of the things that are particularly exciting, I think, about the interactive casebook in the tax context. So one of the questions and concerns we have as professors is how hard will it be to transition to the new book? I was a user of the Donaldson book, and so I understand the concerns about whether there's going to be a significant difference between the old book and the new. The new book keeps the same structure and cases of the Donaldson book and most of the questions. So there's very, very little new material that a professor is going to have to prepare for class. What the book really tried to do is to bring in new material that can be linked to and that can enrich the classroom. So there will be links to new material. There will be videos that professors have the opportunity to use. But the book itself will be very familiar to those professors who had previously used the Donaldson book.
Well, being passionate about tax, that's just about the easiest thing that can happen. Fall off a wagon and you can be passionate about tax. What's not to love about tax? It affects everybody that you know. It affects yourself, your family members. When you think about it and you go to law school, very few people are going to be criminals. At least most of them aren't going to be criminals. Very few people are going to be involved in torts. Frankly, not very many people are involved in litigation to that great extent. But tax is the one subject that permeates everything that we do. It affects business transactions. It affects personal transactions. It affects everyone and many of the decisions that we make. So to be passionate about tax is just simply to be passionate about the world around you. And understanding tax helps you understand the world around you that much more.
So when I was in college, towards the end of college, I ended up working on a political campaign, a presidential campaign. And the person said to me, you need to go work on Capitol Hill because you're never going to be willing to make $13,000 a year again in your life. And they were right. And so when I left college, I went and worked on Capitol Hill. And I worked in budget and tax. And so that's how I became interested in the field of tax. and why I ultimately wanted to become a tax professor. But what I really realized in those 8 years on working on the Hill is that tax really impacts people in a way that almost no other area of law does. We all pay them, lots of us hate them, but we also are all impacted by how tax affects our behavior in the world. And so one of the great things about tax in general, but also this book, is it allows us the opportunity to see how tax itself really impacts policy in a really broad way. And that love of tax and that interest in how tax impacts policy really comes from those 8 years that I spent working on Capitol Hill and watching how tax policy was made.